Hello there. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Marcia Butler, the webinar director here at Advice Chaser, and we welcome you today. Before we introduce our guest and get started, I need to do a bit of legal housekeeping. Advice Chaser, the host of this webinar, is not a registered investment advisor. We cannot and do not give financial advice. Today's presentation is for educational purposes only and cannot be considered advice for any person's individual situation. Advice Chaser regularly hosts informative webinars, such as this one, featuring a variety of knowledgeable professionals, many of whom are licensed advisors. Any opinions, ideas, jokes, or principles expressed by presenters are their own, and however true, funny, or interesting, are not endorsed by Advice Chaser. Please do not act on the information you hear today without consulting a qualified financial professional. We're thrilled to bring you today's educational presentation. Attendees are muted, but we do encourage you to ask questions using the chat box, and the presenter will answer those queries during or after the webinar presentation today as appropriate. If you ask a question in the chat box, go ahead and leave your contact information as well. And if we can't get to your question today, we'll make sure someone reaches out to you after today's event. We want this experience to be as educational as possible, so please don't hesitate to ask for clarification or expansion of the material. I'd love to introduce you to our presenter today. Michael Pistrowski is an accredited wealth management advisor at Limestone Wealth Management, which offers their clients a comprehensive solution to their financial concerns of retirement, savings, and protecting against a myriad of what-ifs in life. The practice is based out of Louisville, Kentucky. About his introduction into the world of finances, Michael said, "When I was a kid, my grandparents would give us stocks and bonds for Christmas and birthdays. So naturally, I was fascinated watching how $1 could turn into $2. I always enjoyed helping people, and I'd say I fell into this career after meeting my former branch manager at a career fair." Michael originally went into college intending to go into youth ministry and pastoral care, and Christian service is still an important part of his life. And this is going to be a really fun, I think, educational experience today. And I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for the time, Marcia. It's interesting how as we enter retirement, as the conversations begin years in advance, what that looks like, the idea of retiring, the actual bridge itself. We use this picture of the bridge in the background as a true example, because you're bridging from your working years into your retirement years. And there's a lot of things to consider, a lot of what ifs to discuss and mull over. But there's some things that might not come up in conversation. I'm working with an advisor. A lot of the times when I have a client, we sit down and talk, we go over a couple of these things that might not have been top of mind or things considered. And hopefully you'll leave today with a few things that might be new to you. It might be an eye-opening way of thinking about things. And it might just be confidence in knowing that you're on the right track and you're headed in the right direction. But we'll kind of move on to the next slide. Americans are in a unique situation. Over the last 100 years, 1,000 years, beyond that, oftentimes retirement isn't what it was as we know it today. Back then, it was oftentimes you got to age 60, 65, and now it's pretty much at the end of your life. We're now in a spot over the last 20 to 30 years where it's actually possible to retire with enough savings and actually have a second life after your work career. And now that we're able to accumulate that kind of wealth, what do we do? How do we prepare for it? And what does that transition look like? So like I said, it's a very unique situation. There hasn't been financial advisors like me 100 years ago. So today it's a practice that we take care of a lot of clients, a lot of conversations about that transition. The idea of we're saving and we're looking for something for down the road. Well, we're actually down the road. It's switching from that accumulation phase to that now what we call distribution phase of life. Is an interesting precipice. We've been during this we've been saving all of these times, all these years during our working years, and now we're going to be in spending mode. So there's some things that might be different. Up until now, you've been saving. Up until now, you've been putting money into your 401k, into your IRAs, putting money back for this moment of being down the road. And a year from now, 2 years from now, into retirement, if we don't talk about it, there's going to be some things that are going to kind of creep up, might feel a little off. Some things might feel wrong. And addressing those head on, knowing what that means and why it's happening that way is important. Hopefully, it's going to alleviate some anxiety. Up until now, your accounts have been growing by two things, by a factor of contributions and market performance. We just got through a 10-year bull market, and then when COVID hit, and then all the different things that have happened since then, the potential for recession, this influx of money, inflation starting to happen, your accounts have been growing by performance and contribution. Well, now they're only going to be growing by performance. So they might not be going up as much. And if we're taking distributions from those accounts, they might not be going up nearly as much as you're used to. So it's important to understand just the nature of the stock market, the ups and the downs, the ebbs and flows. But additionally to that is making sure that you have a good solid plan of what your distributions and taking money out of your retirement plans, what that looks like during your retirement years. We talk about income. A lot of folks say, I'm in retirement, now I'm on a fixed income. Well, for the most of us, we've always been on a fixed income. Now it's just going to be a different source of income, where that money is coming from. It might be now be coming from a pension, it might be coming primarily from Social Security. It might be that you have an annuitized investment account that's paying you a monthly stream of income. But we're just shifting from a different type of fixed income to a new type of fixed income. So it's going to be very important to understand how we handle our cash flow. Cash flow is a very, very unique situation, because up until now, there's a couple of different ways. Well, let me back up. I'm taking over control of the screen here for Marche. Fantastic. Up until now, a lot of folks, the way they handle their cash flow, for the most part, it looks like this. We have one big checking account, and that one checking account brings and is where all of our income gets deposited. And out of that same checking account, all of our expenses are paid. And then at the end of the month, we move over some of the money that's left, or if there's a little surplus left, we move it over. And oftentimes 2 or 3 months later, something pops up that we weren't expecting, and we have to pull that money out. So when it comes to the cash flow in retirement, it's not going to be much different than it was in real pre-retirement during your working years. But understanding where it is now is going to be equally important, because financial advisors' jobs are to be the defender of the 20-year-old older version of yourself. So if you're 65 and you retire, my job is to be the defender of the 85-year-old person from you today. And having that perspective of knowing my job is to guard you against you is challenging. One of the things that happens a lot of times with clients is we build these ideas, and we'll touch on this a little bit more in a second. We build these ideas of what our income needs to be today, but things change. And money is fluid. Oftentimes, in this day and age, we don't have that envelope system of life. We don't have $200 for gas and an envelope sitting in the car. We live in an electronic world, and the way we find out how much money we have is oftentimes we pull up our phone, we look on the app, and we see how much money's in there, and we make our financial decisions based on that. And that creates this challenge, because we're playing this game of mental math. Twice a month, this checking account's really big, and twice a month, this checking account's really small. And how do we navigate that with a different lifestyle in retirement than we had in our working years? And different types of expenses in retirement than we had in our working years. So talking about cash flow, looking and seeing your money differently in this day and age, and it's 2023, it's going to be 2024 before we know it, and it's a totally different way of how we see our finances. So this is something I've encouraged clients to do. There's not a perfect way to handle budgeting. There's not a perfect way to handle cash flow. There's a couple different ways. We've seen some wrong ways from hopefully not our own life, but other friends or stories we've heard in the past. But how do we make sure that we set ourselves up differently and see our money in a more effective way today? Most of us have seen one of these spreadsheets in the past. It goes January to December across the top. And, in January, a lot of clients, they'll sit down and start putting their expenses down. They'll start writing what their spending is, their budget for their home, their utilities, insurance, car payments, whatever the case might be. And then usually you get to about here and you stop and you think, well, what else do we spend our money on? And then we get to May and we got 2 more things we didn't think about. And August rolls around. We got, a couple more that we think about. Then we're starting to rob these other accounts up here. We're starting to rob Peter to pay Paul and play this cup game because we think that this spreadsheet style of budgeting is the way to do it because that's how we've always been taught. And we're trying to zero out and catch up and account for every single dollar. But unfortunately, most people don't get to the bottom right-hand corner. They don't get to December and they check off their budget spreadsheet that looks like this because things that pop up throughout life and throughout the year that you don't really think about. So I'm going to propose a different way of looking at your finances today, a different way of seeing your cash flow. And if nothing else, then you hopefully can kind of take one thing away from this, and then we'll talk about a couple other things before the end. What I encourage folks to do is instead of using a checking account to receive all of your money, let's do a savings account. Have all of your income deposited right into your savings account. And then we're going to repurpose that checking account that you already have, and we're going to identify it as your bills only checking. In that old screen, that old way of looking at things, everything was commingled together. We had 2 sets of eyeballs looking at this account. And we're thinking, okay, today's the 28th, and the mortgage payment comes out in 2 days, and the car payment comes out in 3 days, but I get paid on Friday, and my spouse might get paid in on another day. And we're playing this game of mental math to see really how much money is in that account, because it's kind of a false number. It's not a true indication of how much money you have. So we take our bills only, we allocate, and we say, okay, let's just pretend your budget is $3,500 a month for your bills. And when I think bills, we're talking your mortgage, your insurance, your utility, food in the fridge. I always say gas in the tank, food in the fridge, and lights on at home. The basics, the essentials, the things that keep your house running. Once a month, we're going to transfer enough. We're going to top up your account to $4,000. We're going to give yourself a $500 mental zero. So it's going to, here in a couple of days on July 1st, we're going to top it up to 4,000. Over the course of the month, it's slowly going to drain down to 5. And again, these are going to be all the bills, the things that have to happen. Now, we do this and we say, okay, our income, what goes into our savings account, we'll call I. What has to come out for our bills is going to be B. And what we have left over is X. Now, what do we do with X? Well, of course, we can't spend it all, right? We want to make sure that we're being good stewards of our finances. So what does X equal? We're going to figure that out before we even spend any money. We're going to determine to ourselves and say, okay, of X, of what's left, how much of that do I get to have fun with? When we do this budget, when we go through this whole budgeting experience, we're not doing it because we like to keep track of the numbers. Oftentimes, we're trying to figure out how much fun we can have. We're trying to solve for fun. So of X, we determine how much fun we're going to have. We're going to say, we'll just pretend it's $1,000 a month. We're going to give ourselves $1,000 of an allowance of fun spending money. Now, when you look at your phone, when you look at your app, you see how much money you've got. You're not going to look at the big account. You're not going to look at all of your money. What you're going to do is you're only going to look at your fun checking account. We're not going to pay attention really to what's in the savings. The bills checking account is on autopilot. It's satisfying. It's being ACH'd or pulled from that account. And the only account that you're going to look at on a Friday afternoon, figuring out where you guys are going to go out to eat, what activity you're going to do that weekend. If you want to go buy that thing, if you want to go to that place, that vacation, you're not looking at all your money. You're looking at just the fun account. You're going to give yourself a mental 0 of 100. And when it gets to 100, you're out of money for that month. And that's okay. It's okay to actually, for the first time, you'll be able to spend your account down to 0, almost 0, and be okay with it. It's going to allow you to budget on a smaller scale. You're going to be thinking, okay, it's almost July. We're going to want to do a trip in August. So we got to make sure we leave a couple extra $100 in there. So we don't budget it all the way down to 0. But you can budget now on a smaller scale, like 2 to 3 months out. It's, November rolls around. We got Christmas coming up. We want to make sure we leave a little money in there for our Christmas money. This way, everything else is accounted for. We don't have to keep track of all the different expenses on that spreadsheet. And it gives you just a simpler way to see your finances. So hopefully that's something that you can kind of look at and take away. It's a different way of seeing your finances. It's a different budgeting style. But hopefully that can be a tool that you can implement, whether it's in retirement or whether it's in pre-retirement.
We have a couple of questions about that.
Okay.
You said things could go on autopilot, but obviously things like gas and groceries and stuff like that, where's that coming out of? And kind of how do you account for that since it fluctuates so much for a lot of people?
Sure. No, that's a great question. For the most part, like the things like gas and utilities, those are going to be pretty close. Depending on where you live. Here in Louisville, our LG&E service, we have a budgeting system that they automatically implement. They look at your last 12 months and they give you an average of what you're going to pay, and you kind of get caught up slowly over time. When it comes to groceries, some people put that in the fun account. Some people leave that in the bills. Again, there's not a perfect way to do it. This is just one of the ways that I've been able to find to articulate and illustrate. But there's not a perfect solution to that answer. Some people literally just take out, cash and go to the grocery store and do it that way. But there's not I wish I had a better answer for that, but I've seen it both ways, both in the fun as well as the bills.
And when you were talking about gas, you're talking about like natural gas. Well, I was talking about like
fuel for your
gas
car.
in cars. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I was thinking about fuel for your car.
Okay.
This is.
It's someone was saying it. So are you saying
Yes.
You have 2 checking accounts, one for bills and one for fun?
Exactly. The beauty of this is that you don't need a special app. You don't need to pay some subscription service. You just go to your bank. You say, hey, right now I've got a checking account, a savings account. Can I have another checking account? And by the way, can you name it my fun account? So that you actually, it's identified as fun, there's no confusion. But yeah, the idea is to have 3 accounts, one savings account, 2 checking. And the beauty of this situation is you're now saving first and spending second. Whereas before, most people are spending first and saving second. So it just hopefully kind of gives you that mental mind shift of how I'm handling money. There's 3 things you do with your money. You can spend it, you can save it, and you can give it away. That's your only option. There's nothing else other than that. So this just gives you that ability to save first, spend second, and choose how much money you want to give away on the other side. So anyway, any other questions on that before we move on?
Yeah, we had another question. As far as the savings account, does a high yield savings account make sense?
Yeah. So I oftentimes use savings account for 2 reasons. A, you're going to get now you're going to get a little bit better of an interest rate on your savings account, which is good for your savings money. But secondarily, just the way the banks operate and the banking systems, savings accounts, you can only have so many transactions in on a monthly basis. So this is kind of your way to put small handcuffs on yourself, prevent you from hurting yourself. You can only transfer money out usually, I think, up to 4 times, depending on your bank, without being charged an additional fee to move money out. So it kind of gives you personal handcuffs, guardrails around your money so that savings account, A, grows at a little different rate, and B, prevents you from just dipping in. Oh, the other thing I also like to throw out there too, emergency funds. What does that look like? I think your emergency fund needs to be at a completely separate financial institution. What I don't want you to have is this false sense of wealth. When you look at your phone and you bring it up and you say, oh, wow, I've got that much money in my account. You make different decisions when you got that much money in your account. When you're looking at just the fund account, you're seeing what's really there. You're going to make decisions differently than if there's an extra zero or two. So I say a separate checking account than a different institution, or I'm sorry, separate savings account and a different institution, so that you can't make Disney plans on a Saturday night, 11 o'clock. You know, you have to get in your car on Monday morning, you have to drive over to another bank, you have to go inside, talk to another human, ask them for money, get back in your car, drive back over to your other bank and make that deposit. Again, little bitty handcuffs for yourself to prevent you from hurting you in the future.
All right, another question came up. How big should your savings account grow to before you do something with that accumulated savings?
It's going to be a different answer for everybody, to be quite honest. You want to have an emergency fund, typically 3 to 6 times your expenses, depending on what kind of career you have. If you've got a pretty stable career, I could say go down to the 3 the month side. But if you've got more of a commission-based career where you might not have as consistent income, I'd say closer to the 6 in case something happens. When you get past that number, though, that's usually when I sit down with clients and say, why don't we get together and talk quarterly, see where your savings account is. Once we get above this certain amount, maybe we can put that towards a long-term savings goal. Maybe we can put that toward retirement, maybe a vacation fund, might be another financial goal that you have. But typically, I like to see emergency funds, like I said, around 3 to 6 times your monthly expenses, the bills, and a little bit of that fund. And then in that savings account right there, I'd say probably 2 times your monthly expenses would be sufficient.
Okay. And it's really interesting. Someone said, how long does it take to actually get used to this new system? Like what the transition period is like?
Great question. Great question. I'd say about a month, 2 months probably. The first part just going to be getting enough money to where you can fund these different accounts the first time. And then after that, it's just going to be a habit. It's going to be training yourself to only look at the fund account. It's going to be training yourself to not try to transact out of that bills account. And just, oftentimes depending on what bank you're with, you can hide accounts on your phone so you can't actually see it. It's still there, but you just can't see it. So I'd say about a month and a half to 2 months is usually the transition that I have clients kind of prepare for. Good question.
All right, we'll go ahead and move off of this. If we have more questions, go ahead and put those in the chat.
Yeah, exactly. So, some of the non-financial financials to think about, this idea of this myth of downsizing. A lot of people think, when the kids are out of the house and we retire, we're going to sell the house, we're going to downsize into this patio home. I'll be honest, I've yet to see in the 17 years I've been doing this, I've yet to see a client actually downsize. Oftentimes they go a lateral move. So don't necessarily think that the downsizing is going to happen. Build it into your plan, build it into your financial budget, your long-term plans that you're either going to be in that same house or in a similar home of value. There's a couple different myths that kind of happen, whether it's the rule of thumb of 4% taking distributions on your retirement accounts, whether it's this myth of downsizing, whether it's the idea of talking about long-term care insurance. There's things to consider. And I think one of those we'll kind of talk about too in a second. There's some interesting things that are currently happening. As for the withdrawal rate, I had a conversation with a client today, actually, a difficult conversation. We did a financial plan a couple of years ago. We established that, when Social Security was going to start, we're going to reduce the distributions that were taken from the IRAs. But that didn't happen. They started taking Social Security, other bills popped up, other expenses happened, things that they weren't considering, and they need to replace a vehicle. There's this temptation as the accounts are growing that, wow, we had a great year, we can take out more money. And while we think we can, oftentimes it usually comes as a detriment to the future. We want to set up and plan for consistent income. We want to plan for taking distributions, even in bumper crop years. We're going to have years that follow like we had last year, where the markets were down 15, 20, sometimes 30%. And we don't want to lower your income. We don't want to stop taking that amount. We want to be able to stabilize that income over time. So even as your accounts are growing more than expected, we don't want to go off and take a big vacation that is outside of the overall plans. Sticking to your spending, being committed, making sure that the down the road years, the 20 years from now, we don't jeopardize by having too much fun today. I see a question in here is when is the right time to start converting portions to a Roth? That's going to depend, I'd say, more on your current income situation. There's a difference between marginal rates and effective rates when it comes to taxes. We don't want to pay more in taxes than we should. Usually it's a conversation I have with clients and CPAs somewhere in that November, December time of the year, when you know what your income is for the year and you've got money that you're thinking about converting to Roths. We don't want to throw you into a higher marginal rate by accident, but if nothing else, make sure we know how to plan for it. But it really, it's going to be, it's not so much how many years before retirement, but it's going to be more along the lines of, in my opinion, more along the lines of what your current income is right now. But it is a good estate planning tool to convert to Roths. We do that a lot with clients. But I joke, I say this to a lot of folks. I've yet, when someone asks me how much money do I need to save for retirement, I get that question a lot. A lot of advisors get that question a lot, and the answer is different. But I will say this: I've never had somebody walk into my office at retirement and sit down and say, "Mike, we just saved too much money. We don't need all of this money. This is just too much. We did too well of a job." I've yet to have somebody say that. So that being said, when somebody asks me how much money should I save, I'll ask them first, "What are you saving now?" Of course, they'll tell me, and I'll say, "I'd encourage you to save a little bit more than what you're doing. If you're saving 2%, I'd say let's start saving 3 to 4. If you're saving 10%, I'd say let's see if we can get that up to 12 or 13. And next year, if we can bump it up again, get to the point where we're maxing that 401k out. Depending on your age, the limits have gone up these last couple of years. You can get a lot of money in retirement accounts these days. And special super tax or super Roth 401k options, depending on your company and your income, you can get up to $67,000 a year into a 401k plan in a tax deferred or tax sheltered way. But regardless of what you're doing, I'd encourage you to save $50 more than you're already doing, $100 more than you're already doing. Again, because no one's ever walked in to my office and said, "Mike, we just did too well." So some of the things to consider for retirement, long-term care. I was on a call this morning with a team of insurance specialists. Depending on what state you're in, there's discussions right now to implement a long-term care tax based on your income to pay for long-term care for you as you get older. It's not in every state. There's a lot of things that haven't been ironed out about that, but there's a 50% chance that a two-person household called a married couple, one of those people is going to need long-term care for at least 2 to 3 years at their end of life. Oftentimes, it's the second person. Usually the one person gets sick, the other person helps take care of that person, their spouse. They pass away, and it's the second person that's around is the one that's going to need it the most. So building in any financial plan that I ever build, I always factor in for the last 3 to 4 years, there's going to be a long-term care insurance need. And how does that impact your overall financial plan? What we want to do is make sure that we don't spend all of your assets down to zero and put you in a situation where you're now relying on somebody that you don't want to have to rely on other than yourself. Medicare is a funny thing. Medicare, either you know everything about Medicare or you don't. It's rare that you have someone that knows a little bit or a lot about. It's either you know everything about it or you don't. The reason why is because you make that decision once And once you're on it, you're on it. So it's something to consider. It's something to have somebody to talk to about as you're getting close to it. But it's not going to be something that you need to know everything about today unless you're retiring tomorrow. And then obviously Social Security is going to be a big thing that factors into a large portion of your income. A lot of conversations about, is it going to last? Right now, I think the target is 2034, where where Social Security is supposed to run out. That's a political football that gets kicked around. From what I've read and discussed and had conversations with smarter people than me, there's a couple levers that can be pulled to make sure that it's funded, whether it's delaying when you can receive it, what the amount's going to be. But right now, it's a political football that hasn't been solidified yet. So I'm a believer that it's probably going to be there in some shape, some form. Regardless, though, we try to make sure we plan that it's as though it's not, so that we can account for that. But it's definitely something that's going to play a major role, especially for folks that are, I'd say, 5 to 10 years from retirement from right now. One more question. Oh, that was just for you, Marche. Okay. Well, I appreciate your all's time, folks. There's a lot of things to consider. If you don't sit down with a financial planner yet or financial advisor to build out a financial plan, I highly encourage that. Give you some peace of mind, especially in turbulent times like this. A lot of the emotions that come up when we watch the news, when we watch TV, and we read about financial things that are happening in the world. Having a financial plan to lean on brings a lot of peace of mind. So thanks for your time. I hope you guys have a great day.
All right. And thank you so much for everyone who has been here and for the organizations that have made it possible today. Thanks to you, Michael, for being here and for presenting such good information today. Here at Advice Chaser, we're all about helping you find a financial advisor who's a great fit for your life and your financial questions. Our matching service is free to you, and every one of our advisor partners has committed to offer a free initial consultation to anyone we introduce them to. Find out more by going to advicechaser.com and clicking on the link to find an advisor. One more note, we will be sending out a link to this replay and posting it on our website as well. If you want to review that, I know we went through a lot of information. You might want to review that. Well, once again, from Advice Chaser, thank you so much for coming, and we will see you at another webinar soon. Goodbye, everyone.